was a message saying just that to every officer and enlisted man in our 5th Army. One little phrase hit it right on the head. "We are here to stay," said Lieutenant General Mark W. Clark.
Cream puff war, huh?
Oh, don't get me wrong. Of course it was rough. All wars are. But shucks, you was talking about one measly little week. Now you take the Argonne.
1 week, he calls it. 1 measly little week. Why, man, this fight was only just beginning. Those Nazis weren't calling it quits. Not yet, they weren't.
Don't forget, this was still Hitler's Fortress Europe. The enemy could still hit hard. Delaying tactics. They still spell out fight. We began to see the last of the mountains and started thinking again about Naples. Relief now for men in forward areas as reserves became available. Relief wouldn't be enough if you'd been stopped by those delaying tactics. Out of those tactics, we were getting us bigger batches of guests, most of them real polite by now. But it was still war. One town, Salerno, took 100 rounds from our Navy guns before we could move in. Other towns, out of big gun range, had to be pried open like oysters. Mop up one town, then on to the next. Where the fighting had moved on, civilians would reappear. They'd even welcome us. It meant they understood that this was the price they had to pay if their towns had any value to the enemy. They had tossed old Benito out of his job and were ready to take punishment if that was the only way to get rid of his buddies. Mussolini's buddies were now returning that feeling. Demolitions, mines, time bombs could only delay us, but they could create horror and hardship for the civilian population. And Nazi had turned vengeful. Civilian made as fair a target as soldier. Here again was Eboli and other towns we'd fought for. Now they were ours for good. We pushed on toward Naples. More and more people were welcoming us along the way, no longer afraid of the Nazis' return. A pretty good sign. There were other signs, too. The enemy was destroying his equipment, but still leaving us with beat-up roads and beat-up bridges. Come to think about it, we were pretty beat up too by now. Relief units became a welcome sight. Wrecked towns no longer meant warfare. It had become enemy spite as he fled north. We'd have to move fast if anything was to be saved in Naples. Rebuilding roads became routine, and we pushed on toward that port and those airfields we wanted. Outfits that could stop along the way found they'd been winning a popularity contest along with the battle. It's a funny thing about soldiers, anyway our soldiers. Kids always go for them in a big way, and we do a bit of melting down ourselves. You got to wondering what it was like to be a youngster in the middle of a war. Wonder, too, what kind of miracle it would take to make some of them laugh, be kids again.
You know, Pop, sometimes when I look at Tommy, I think back on those towns we fought through and all those poor kids.
Rough on kids. Women folks, too. War always is.
Times, too, when I get to thinking that if we hadn't fought through scraps like that, maybe one day he'd know the same kind of life those kids knew.
Well, now you got a point. I used to get the same notion watching you when you was growing up.
Well, we did our best to bring those kids their miracle. Then our military government people came in to distribute needed relief and reorganize paralyzed communities. There was nothing left for our armies now but to move into Naples. And maybe Naples wasn't waiting. Here again, it was the old story. Only worse, the time bomb and the mine. Here, too, methodical destruction. But we expected that and had a few ready-made tricks to counter it. Our great prize, the port of Naples, had been wrecked. But this, too, we had expected. Within weeks, some installations would be back in use. The retreating enemy had missed no bets. The main aqueduct had been cut. An emergency water supply had to be improvised. Not a single utility had been left functioning, but they would be restored. We took care of that. We had gained our victory, and all Italy south of the Volturno was ours. Neither our leaders nor any of us would forget those others. The ones who'd helped us crash the European continent. American fighting men who brought honor to themselves, the armed forces, and our country.
Yes, old soldiers of all ages will continue to refight the old battles. Call it pride in self, in the outfit, in our military traditions. No matter which, it serves us all. In those oft-repeated stories, there is inspiration to acts of courage and sacrifice when newer challenges to our American heritage must be met. Now, this is Sergeant Stuart Queen, your host for The Big Picture.
The Big Picture is an official report for the armed forces and the American people. Produced by the Army Pictorial Center. Presented by the Department of Army in cooperation with this station.